You're live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to MetaMH TV. We're really pleased to see you today. We're talking about some really interesting topics with a fantastic guest. We're talking about diversity and cultural awareness in nursing practice, and we really want to hear from you and what you think. So before we get going into that subject, let's go to Dave. And Dave, if you can tell us how people can join in on social media. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Nicky. It's great to see you all tonight. Hopefully, we're going to have a really good conversation. Social media-wise, you've got a couple of ways of joining in. One of them is to post on the Facebook live chat. Obviously, just any questions, any comments, any thoughts, any feelings, just pop them on there. And anything that's appropriate to feed in, we will draw it in and have a chat about the issues that you raise. The other option is on Twitter. You just have to include the hashtag MHTV. If you include that, we should see it. And again, we'll bring in what we can later on in tonight's conversation. But without further ado, straight back to you, Nicky.
Absolutely. Beverley, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're going to be talking about tonight?
Yes, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very flattered. My mum's very impressed as well with that. So I'm Beverley Brathwaite. I've been a registered nurse for far too long, over 30 years, and I've been a lecturer in adult nursing, but I've taught across all the fields for the last approximately 20 years. Probably in the last 10 years or so, a lot of my focus has been on looking at issues of BAME, Black and brown people, or the global majority, so many ways of saying the term, and looking at areas in regards to workforce as a nurse. I'm doing my PhD at the moment and looking into the identity of British-born Caribbean female nurses. So I've been a bit submerged, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, in issues of ethnicity, race, racism, and particularly within a British context. So I've been looking about that. So I've tended to be teaching a lot in those areas of inequality and race and ethnicity and the theoretical issues around those terms, and also the data and the statistics around that. And obviously in the last 18 months, there's been something that's been on everybody's agenda, like, that's it, COVID, unfortunately. And so I've done a bit of work around the reasons why people that look like myself are more likely to have died of COVID-19, and that sort of relates to the disparities in health. So that's sort of things I've been doing. And then in the middle of a PhD, I thought writing a book on the title of the session today would be a good idea. Thank you very much. I know you're one of the contributors to the book as well. Thank you for that. And so it's becoming my area very quietly of supposed expertise, but not by any stretch yet, but an area that I know a little bit about.
Absolutely. So let's get into sort of some of the sort of nitty-gritty sort of issues then, thinking about what the experience of Black and brown nurses in the NHS workforce is, because it's certainly a situation where there is considerable inequality. Is there something you can talk to us about that?
Yes. There's been a lot of talk about it, particularly in the last, let's say, 5 years, because of the workforce race equality standards that have come up. So there's many people that have been looking into that, from Roger Klein initially, who works here at State University, to Yvonne Coghill, particularly, that retired now, but was had a lot to do with it at the beginning. And so having that data, and particularly over the last 5 years, looking at very specific areas in regards to what the concerns are for Black and brown nurses in the NHS, has been really interesting, because it's good to, anecdotally, within, let's say, the Black and brown community, we can say, yes, we know that we're not getting jobs as frequently as we know our white colleagues are. But that's just anecdotally, and people know that's, you just imagine that, like there are, look at this person in this position, and look at that person in that position, and it's right. But what Res has done, which is really important, has highlighted how from band 5 and to band 8, basically the higher up the banding you go, the more white it becomes. And that data has stayed approximately pretty static, might have go up and down a bit in the last 5 years. And lots of us have known that for a very long time, who have been in nursing and that are not white, have known that exists. And now we have the data to say that exists, that we don't get the jobs. We're less likely to be shortlisted compared to our white counterpart. Oh, David, are you waving?
Sorry, my youngest child is just going to bed and said night.
Okay,
so
I thought you wanted to say something there. Good night. Okay, sorry.
Night.
Yes. So, where was I? Yes. So, with regards to applying for jobs, less likely to be shortlisted. Still in very specific areas. There tends to be more nurses still in mental health than in, let's say, adult nurses and adult nursing. And then there's still certain specialities where there are less Black nurses than there are white. And to put it in some kind of context, in Southeast England, the nursing workforce is approximately, let's say, 45 to 50%, particularly in London. I'm comfortable in saying about 45%, if not more. That statistic is quite well known, that are not white, that work in London. But that doesn't necessarily help the statistics anymore. We're still more likely to be in band 5 positions than our white counterparts compared to 8A. And that hasn't changed. 20 years ago, there was a document called Against All Odds that came out, I think it was 2001 too, that said that only 3% of all, what at that time were I grades, which would be an 8A-B now, were BME, and that's regardless of gender. And that's incorporating basically anybody who wasn't white. It was only 3%. There's been some changes, but still, it's not, 20 years later, it's not significantly higher than that in most areas. And so that's something to, obviously knowing about that data is important. It's what we can do about that data and how we make things better so that people have an equitable, not equal, an equitable chance at going for the jobs that they very much have the qualifications and the experience to do that kind of job. So it is an ongoing issue in regards to workforce. I mean, there's the other not so, even more negative data with regards to bullying, harassment, and victimization tends to be more recorded, or if you ask, they feel more likely to be experiencing issues if you're Black or brown. I mean, you're more likely to be sent to the Nursing Midwifery Council if you're not white. I mean, on the other flip side is that if you are white and you do go to the Nursing Midwifery Council, you are actually more likely to be struck off the register, which I always think is an interesting. The first time I heard that, I was like, oh, and then I thought a bit about it. You've got to be pretty bad to go to the NMC as possibly a white nurse. So when you go, you're going for a damn right reason, and you're being struck off. While it's for want of a better word, the lower offences that a Black or brown member of staff will be sent to, and so it's less likely that they will need any action needs to be taken. There's an area that it needs probably I need to look in a bit more detail, or they're more likely to be suspended but not struck off, which that work has been done 2-3 years ago. I think it's Greenwich. I think did it. Don't quote me on that in regards to that.
I think there's informal management as well, isn't there, for white people that you see? Given the benefit of the doubt, given the last warning, and so it doesn't get recorded in the same way. Whereas Black and brown nurses, straight to punitive measures or measures that are recordable.
Yes, and so that shows that even when there's issues of, well, not even, let's say, was legislation for one way with the Equality Acts on one side, and the systems and processes that an organisation will have in regards to that are supposed to be treating people meant to be invisible to those issues of gender or ethnicity or anything like that. It's just goes, you just follow the process. Process are enforced by human beings.
Yeah.
And with those human beings come all the things that human beings do really well or not so well when it comes to their biases and their prejudices and their stereotypes and their assumptions, and what their expectations of the conduct and actions of certain genders and certain people from parts of the world, or from or how they assume that a person of a certain colour or cultural, religion, or ethnicity will function. So legislation has a place, obviously, as does systems and processes. But if the culture of the organisation and the leadership of the organisation make a very significant stand on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and also acknowledges what's going on in regards to these issues, things don't change. The Black Lives Matter movement didn't come out of nothing, because there's been, whether it be here or across the pond, the Equal Quality Care Act has taken from, sex discrimination, race discrimination. I think 1976, race discrimination was first a legal attribute. So that's quite a while ago. And some of the issues that are concerned there are still the issues concern us now. So obviously legislation is and systems and processes is not enough.
No, it's difficult to see then. How do we move from, it's great, you're absolutely right, it's great that we're measuring stuff and it's really clear what the problem is. How do we move from keep measuring the same thing? Because you have that that temptation for people just to keep doing the thing that they know they can do. And there's a point where you measure inequality to the point where you're like, we know now, we need to do something different. Well, what do you think the next stage would be to move that debate and that experience on?
Well, I think the reason why it's still an issue, because it's the hardest part of the debate. And that's that, firstly, there has to be a real, actual, clear acknowledgement that it exists, within the organisation, and that it exists within society. And unfortunately, why it's probably going to take longer at the moment is because we at the moment have a government that clearly think that systemic and structural racism does not exist. Individual racism, people shouting every kind of N and P and Y word that they can possibly muster, it exists. There's too many videos to say that it doesn't. Even if there's enough writing around those issues, there's enough. You can see that, you can hear that, you can observe somebody experiencing that. Structural, institutional racism, which is always the most insidious and always the most. It's there, but you can't quite touch it. As always, is the one that is the most difficult to grasp. And if as a country we don't acknowledge that, then it makes it very difficult for any government or non-government institution to state that it does. So academically, everybody had, at least a lot of academics had a sigh of not relief, but of, I can't believe we're having this conversation about institutional structural racism. Again, when we thought it was a given that it was understood that it exists. You may not think it happens in your organisation, you may not think you have anything to do with it, but it exists. Now we're battling again that it does exist. And we're battling against government policy, but we're also battling against other categories. So we're battling against class, and we're battling against LGBTQ, and we're battling against, education and things like that. We're battling the education, lack of education is the reason why people aren't doing so well. Their class is why people aren't doing as well. It's these things are more important than ethnicity, race, even arguably in some circumstances religion, even though that's an area on its own. So that makes it really, really difficult to try and move forward when you're battling against that. What I would ask is, then why do we have the legislation if that doesn't exist? But,
it's almost as if there's two things going on, isn't it? So one thing is, sometimes I wonder if the more privilege that somebody has, the harder it is for them to admit it, because it feels like, and if you are, for example, a white person who has had to have some fights in your life to get where you're going, it's very hard to admit that you started the race further ahead than some people do. And I think sometimes people maybe feel that it's a personal attack or a suggestion that maybe things haven't been hard for them or they haven't tried. And that's not the case. That's not what any of that means. I think there's a purposeful misrepresentation of what privilege means. And I think that doesn't help anybody, because it means you can't have a proper debate, a proper discussion. If you're, and there is also, I think, a sense of, I don't know if it's fear exactly, or pain at admitting that you have privilege. You know, somehow it's a painful thing to admit, because people want to think that things are fair, want to think that they are fair-minded, and those two things aren't necessarily against each other. You can be, you're part of a system, whether you believe in fairness or not, and that system is, exactly as you say, made up of lots of people, and people can change and systems can change. But also, I think sometimes they can feel a bit outside someone's control sometimes, and it's easier for them to say that there is no problem than actually say there's a problem that impacts us all. We all are poorer for this experience. We're all harmed by it. And I think it's quite difficult for people to admit it.
I think you're absolutely right there, particularly with regards to the issue of privilege and in regards to the main one, even though there's many, white privilege is exactly that people is, that there's a big area that people think that it means that, you haven't had to struggle. I mean, I arguably as a Black woman have as much in common as arguably maybe a white working class man does in many respects, because we've both been disadvantaged before we started compared to a white middle class person. We both had our issues. As you clearly said, it is never, white privilege is not about the fact that your life is easy. There's only a handful of people, well, more than a handful of people across the planet where it really is incredibly easy, incredibly easy, and they don't necessarily have to worry about anything. The majority of us on this planet have to work very, very hard to get anything, to get anywhere, get further. But as you said, it is where you start from, or that there are certain things that you will never experience. Like there's some privilege that a man has that he will never experience because he's a man, and you and I are women, regardless of ethnicity, and the differences there. There is a privilege to be a man. The headlines recently clearly identify that. Not saying that men don't get killed, but not there's less. You have less fear. There's some places that are very dodgy, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman. I'm not disputing that either. But as a woman, there's things that we have to take into consideration that men just don't have to take into consideration at all. So there's a privilege. There's a gender-based privilege, but that doesn't mean that men out there aren't working very hard and can't be hurt and harmed just like anybody else can. But they do have a privilege. They don't necessarily have to worry about certain things. So privilege is a key thing. And for me, that relates then next to bias, because there's a whole issue about racial bias or the implicit bias or the overt biases that we have. And I think there's a real tension between bias, racial bias, and racism. So saying that you are biased, especially with racial bias or implicit bias, means you're not actively thinking about being racist. Is how I argue it, or how it is. But for those who experience it, it doesn't really matter from our experience whether you're doing it on purpose and making a decision. I am not doing this because you're Black and I think you are less than I am, and not as as not as good a person as I am, and not as intelligent as I am. 21st century racism. Yes, those are the things you get to see on social media in the films and social media coverage in regards to the videos of multiple people being overtly stating that they're not wanting you there because you are Black. But what really impacts on your day-to-day life as a Black or brown person is racial bias, is implicit racial bias.
Let's talk a little bit about that then. Particularly, it's about clinical decision making, something that we can all think about. How does that impact there?
Yes, well, I mean, there's data on that as well with regards to in the impact it's having on decision making. So the key areas of evidence that are coming out in regards to that is the American study about 5 years ago asking medical students, do Black people experience pain the same, and if not, possibly why not, or worse than that? Okay, and it's because they think that Black skin is thicker than white. Now, I may have more melanin, but that doesn't make it thicker.
No.
So I mean, that is really quite surprising, because one, there's a certain level of intelligence that there's not an assumption that you have to have, at least academically, in order to become a medical student. You've got to have done reasonably well in school to do medicine. Okay, academic intelligence and other type of emotional intelligence is a whole different discussion. But so a lot of times people attribute racism or biases like that on class and lack of education. You just need to educate people and so on and so forth. So you have a group of educated to university standard who are going to do a course that's going to last 5-6 years, and then multiple years after that before they become proficient to do things on their own. And that social construct is so strong, it supersedes basic physiology.
Yeah.
And so that piece of research, as the concept of that physiology of the skin, I don't think's changed in a while. I think it's pretty static, but still the social construct and the belief and the stereotyping is so strong, it supersedes or it crushes fact. And again, we can discuss fact, but that, and that is why, and that is how it is so difficult to move forward, because how can you change that kind of mindset? And I'm sure if you asked all of, if you asked all those people, do you think you are racist? Now, they're probably all going to say no, because no one actually wants to be a race. No one actually wants to say, yes, I'm proud to be a racist. But they're quite proud to do and act and behave in racist ways. But if you call that out as racism, they'll get, the racists will get offended. But if it's implicit bias, I'm not necessarily, what you're doing is racist. I'm not saying that you as a human being are racist. I'm not saying that you're doing this on purpose, but the effect is exactly the same as if you were overtly racist. I mean, that's a key concept with implicit bias, that the effect is the same as someone who is overtly racist. Arguably, it's even worse, because it means that if I try and get a loan, I can't get one I won't get a good as rate to somebody. I can't get the kind of job that I can get paid better for, that my ability to advance is reduced, that my academic attainment is impacting on, because there's all of that data about the awarding gap, not only at university level, but at A level. So, by the time they get to us at university, those cumulative biases has that evidence has been out there for a long time. Up to about 5, it's all good, and then it can dramatically change. So, that racial bias, that implicit racial bias that exists, has a significant impact on the lives of Black and brown people. So until we get people to try and accept that they have the potential to do that, everybody has biases. Every single body has them, of any ethnicity, of any religion, of any class. We all have our biases. So we all need to check those biases, absolutely. And we all have different types of privilege, and we need to check those privilege. But if you have a group of people in an organization that don't acknowledge that happens, and acknowledge that they can be a part of that, then that's really difficult. And I've been in rooms with training and where people put statistics up about what's going on in relation to, let's say, the awarding gap in university education, or the impact that racial bias can have on Black and brown people. And I've had a room full of white people absolutely say it's got nothing to do with me. I'm not racist. I'm going to say it out loud. I don't see color. There's a whole contentious statement. But we'll not accept that they possibly, or they probably do, because we all do. But when it becomes specific in regards to race, let's say even LGBTQ, like transphobia or homophobia, people have, can have an issue of, no, I can't be that. Then why is what's happening? Then that's the case. If all of you people who work here don't see color and don't have all of these issues, then why are, particularly with the education attainment, why are Black and brown students who come in with exactly the same qualifications as their white counterpart have a statistically less chance of coming out with a 2-1 or a first degree? Why is that? Why is that?
Let's come to some questions now, because I think you're raising some really interesting ideas about how we move forward, and actually how we acknowledge things that are painful, and how we investigate stuff which is upsetting sometimes, and how we treat each other with kindness and respect no matter what. So let's come to Dave and see if there's some questions. I can see there's some stuff going on Facebook right now. So do you have any questions for us, Dave?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a debate going on Facebook. And I think rather than kind of bring it all to you, I just want to ask the first question and get your take on it. So Ben said, do white mental health patients need to acknowledge their privilege? Do Black and brown nurses have privilege over their white patients?
There's one. I think the thing that we need to acknowledge in regards to, because that can possibly be an area where people identify as, that says, like, reverse racism is a thing, when it's not a thing. Now, with regards to being a mental health patient with mental health issues in a mental health setting, there is a power dynamic between being a mental health patient and the nurse. I'm hoping that Nicky will help me out with that. Yeah. So there's a whole power dynamic in regards to that. Irrespective of, we could talk about the dynamics in regards to possibly gender, and definitely in regards to race and ethnicity. So there's a power dynamic there anyway. Any mental health nurse in a mental health setting should consider the power that they have and the power dynamic that is within a mental health setting. And how you have even legal power with regards to if somebody's being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. You are taking the rights away of mental health patients. So there's a whole debate and issue there about the power of mental health nurses in the clinical environment with patients who have mental health issues, irregardless of issues of ethnicity. If Nicky can help me out on that, if I'm right.
That's true. Yeah.
There's that issue. But the key thing in relation to what Ben is saying about basically, can Black nurses treat white patients with mental health issues or other in a way that is based on ethnicity? Yes, they can. But I think you have to understand how racism works. And I think that's the thing that's usually quite difficult for people to imagine. Because all people can be prejudiced. Yeah. All people can show discrimination. So Black nurses can show prejudice and discrimination to their white patients. There's absolutely no doubt about that. We could all do that. The one thing that differentiates between racism and prejudice and discrimination is power, and who has power, and where that power lies within society and within an organization. And when it comes to who has power, the majority of the population, particularly in countries where Black and brown people are in the minority and the majority of the population is white, most of the power lies in those white people. And Black and brown people have less power, economically and politically, particularly. So in nursing, let's say in healthcare, there are less people in positions of power. There are less senior nurses who have power. There are less people that make legislation and less people that make NHS policies and procedures who are Black and brown. So those things will impact more on Black people than they do in regards to issue of racism than white. But can nurses of any ethnicity be prejudiced, can discriminate, and stigmatized is another real important one, particularly in mental health. Even for mental health nurses, white mental health users, absolutely. No one's disputing that a group of people in a certain context can't have more power than another. There's been too many studies about people in prisons and and all those things in relation to what power does and how people use power. So I wouldn't take away the fact that mental health patients, regardless of ethnicity, can't be treated badly by their mental health user. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's a different form of power when it comes to racism. That's an added one. That doesn't mean that white mental health patients who have mental health issues who are white can't be treated badly in the system. And I think I can ask Nicky, but I am sure there is a lot of evidence around the experiences of mental health patients in hospitals.
Huge amounts.
Regardless of ethnicity.
I think you've really answered that now, because one of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is this idea that, the way that we connect to each other as human beings is about relationships. And we've got multiple different parts of our personalities and identities, and those are intersectional, Kimberly Crenshaw. So, the last thing that we would want to do, I think, is get into one of these awful games of like snakes and ladders, where you try and count how many things you've got going against you and how many things going for you, and then try and total it up into who wins. That doesn't feel like the best understanding of that complexity.
Yes.
And I guess what it points to, for me, and I might be wrong for guys about this, so please, if I've misunderstood, do shout, is this, what it tells us is how we can be kind to each other, and the things that we need to value and celebrate in each other, rather than the things that we need to denigrate each other for. So it should, if we're going to count up, it should be to count up to maximize each other's strengths instead of to try to bring each other down, because we can hurt each other as human beings in a billion different ways, and they're all wrong. Aren't they? So stop doing that.
Sorry, go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, I suppose one of the thoughts I had when you were talking earlier is that bit about, do we always end up having a fight between people who have less privilege amongst each other, because that's kind of created and generated as something to do, rather than kind of focus that frustration and anger at the people that are kind of generating that fight. And I think kind of, looking at the situation that the government's created in terms of, the report that it wrote, is it about a year ago now, where it kind of argues against institutional racism, which obviously has been kind of a really fundamental part of how our society kind of responded to the Stephen Lawrence murder. And kind of taking those step backs to create this culture war again that makes people have to, like you said earlier, have this fight again, keeping them busy with that rather than actually being able to address the problems that society faces and try and solve some of those problems. It's such I feel depressed about it, and I'm a privileged white man, middle-aged, that doesn't have to worry about that. It depresses me. So, for someone like yourself who's sort of actively campaigning and trying to do really good work about this, it must be so demoralizing.
I think there's an issue about whether, it's human nature. I think if you've been doing work like this for a while or been looking into it, and there's people that's been doing, good work in this area for considerably longer than myself, so all respect for them, because it can get like that, because you can spend time so from Ben's perspective, possibly, stop me if I'm wrong, Ben, because we're talking about blackness, for want of a better term, non-whiteness, it means that all, that white people don't go through any struggles, don't get treated badly, don't get hurt by the police, don't get killed, don't get, all the bad things that can happen to me can happen to you, David. Do you know what I mean? But there are things that will happen to me that will not happen to you, that aren't necessarily due to my ethnicity, could be due to my gender. There are things that that won't happen to you, but there are definitely things that will happen to me that won't happen to you. So I know that Nicky's in the book that I mentioned, you have a chapter in the book, and it's one of the most widely pieces of areas in regards to the significant difference in how mental health patients have been treated historically in regards to, let's say, I was going to say withhold and restraint, but I don't think that withhold is the right word, is it? Control and restraint.
Being the more people who are black and brown are more likely to come in under section, they're more likely to come in via police. Should we say police support? Polite way of describing it. They're more likely to receive medication at higher doses. They're less likely to receive talking therapies. And again, it's not that I think nurses are trying to hurt people. I think that nurses are people, and society replicates its problems in all the different parts of life. I don't think there's anything particularly even surprising about it. It's saddening.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that mental health has going for it is we have had a long history of problematic relations with power over vulnerable people and vulnerable groups. And if any part of nursing, it should be able to look at itself and do better its mental health, because we've made so many mistakes. We surely are at a stage now where we can start learning from them without anybody else having to suffer, because I think it harms nurses and nursing as much as it does the people that experience that negative care, because it's not really care, that negative experience. So I think, that we need to start talking about this and move forward together. Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's some more questions though, Dave. I saw loads on the WhatsApp.
Yeah, there is. It's quite difficult, isn't it, to kind of do both at the same time. So if I kind of read through them a little bit quickly, and maybe Nicky, you can help me sort of pull the things out you think that haven't been addressed yet. Yeah. So obviously we had that question from Ben, and he just said that he really appreciates the response that you gave, that it was considered and thoughtful, but he doesn't agree with it. So obviously, that's absolutely fine too.
Hey, you know what? Yeah. Fair dues.
And then Mushtag made a comment quite early on in the debate about how, let's find it. I can't. Black mental health nurse. Oh no, it wasn't that one. Sorry, I've lost that.
But it can't be racist, is what she said, because they don't benefit from the structural power. So she was looking more at the type of definition that you've got there, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm of the position that I don't think black people can be racist. But as I said, yes, you can be prejudiced, and yes, you can be discriminate. You can discriminate against people, and those are two important key components of racism. It's the power issue, and what that power issue is based on. That's key. So, as I said before, black nurses, like any nurse, can definitely be can discriminate unfairly and can stereotype unfairly. And can discriminate unfairly against any group. Absolutely, anybody can have those, can demonstrate those areas. Of course, depending on where in a working context where you are in regards to power. So you've got more power if you're an ATE or a senior matron than if you're possibly like a band 5 nurse. So there's issues. But do I think black people can be racist? The issue of power isn't. But then even if I was watching somebody talk about this, even let's say black people could be racism, and as that person said, was very interesting, and what? It will still be wrong.
Yeah.
I don't think black people can be, and so yes, so I still want to eradicate racism. I still don't think racism has a place in civilized society. I want equity. I want people to be able to do the best they can, wherever the part of the world they come from, whatever ethnicity or religion they come from, and all the other possible isms that are out there. I just want people to be treated equitably and have an equitable chance at life. But there are lots of things that stop people: class, income, as well as ethnicity and race and gender and transgender and LGBTQ.
Let's move on to...
Well, there's a lot.
Absolutely. Go on. Are you going to say so, Dave? So I'm going to move on to one of the other questions.
No, I was just going to say, Anne Simon, thank you. She's made a few comments. Implicit racial bias attempts to dehumanise the black race and culture, as does deep-rooted stigma of divide and rule. I think obviously, some of those will be responding to some of the comments that have been made as we've been going along. Also, Alfonso, the issue, exactly that, Beverley. People who do not see their own biases do not realise that they are actually part of the issue. And I think that goes back to that comment you made about people saying that I don't see colour. And, I think that's such a weird thing to say, because it's kind of discounting the experience of, people that do. It's just a really blunt way of saying, don't talk to me about this because I don't care. Yeah. So just weird.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
And then
I've had more than one person say that to me, thinking, believing that it's the right thing to say, and it's coming from a good place. I've had, I won't go to who said it, the last time someone said it to me. I changed their thinking on it, so I feel quite proud about that. But to say that, what I say in regards to that is, why would you not want to I have got a different colour than you, and that there isn't a problem with that. I'm just going to keep going back, but it's how we categorise that and what we do in regards to the power we have in relation to that. That's the problem, not the fact that people are of different colours and have different physical appearances. So if you're thinking that's a transgender woman, and I could possibly see that initially that's somebody who was born a man. But if that transgender person is saying that transgender, I'm a woman, then you're a woman. I'm not arguing with you. I may see something different, but if that's how you feel and that's how you want to be treated, that's absolutely fine. It's like saying I don't see gender. Yeah, we do. It's a bit more. It's more layered than it has ever been. And that's fair enough. But okay, saying you don't see gender would be a bit weird, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But,
and then Ohenoa Gurn has said, I also think there are biases in all parties at a point in time, usually due to lack of knowledge of each other's background. Alfonso's gone for a question. From a nursing training perspective, we know that often teaching diversity and cultural competence is not seen as a key competence or something that is covered in 1 or 2 sessions, but there is little formal teaching. How can we make sure that this is threaded through the nursing curriculum?
Well, as lecturers, we have to do that in regards to putting it in our curriculums. We have to do that and highlighting it in everything that we do. So, he's talking about there, even though decolonizing the curriculum is diversifying the curriculum, I think is a newer term, but, basically seeing the curriculum as something that should represent the lecturing staff, but also the students, and for us as healthcare educators, the patient population that you're going to be looking after. So as we're teaching in London and South East of England, and the majority of the Black and brown population is in that part of England, we definitely have a responsibility. I mean, at Middlesex, well, I know mental health, possibly over 95% of your student population is black and brown, and in adult nursing, I think I would say in London at most universities, I'm guessing, educating you, but guessing, must be at least 75% in many a university, if not considerably higher than that. The nursing population is black and brown across the board, particularly in adult nursing. Can't say for children's, there's always an issue in children's, but so having a curriculum that demonstrates and highlights everybody is really important. I have to say, hence why I wrote the book, or got the book started and got people to write the book that we the session that today's talk is identified as, because particularly from a British perspective, there weren't actually a lot of books around. A lot of the books we use are American. But I think it's incumbent on us in regards to those who write curriculums, and then even those who run modules. The curriculum is a whole big thing, but every module leader can put whatever slant to a certain degree based around the NMC, that they can. The NMC clearly states about the importance of diversity and treating people equitably, and there's no place for that as a profession and as a healthcare professional. So I think it's definitely up to us. We do the teaching, we write the modules, we write the curriculum. So all those curriculum meetings that we try to dodge. When there's a new curriculum out, we're like, I can't sit in another meeting about curriculum development because I'm going to cry. And I have been that person as well. I really dodged the last one. I'm studying, haven't got time. But there were lots of other people there, who have to try and get that voice across. And I think, particularly in health, there are some changes afoot from in skills, just having dummies and apparatus that's brown, to teaching about assessing people whose skin isn't white. I mean, these are things that many of us thinking, well, why haven't we been talking about them before? But I can definitely see it slowly infiltrating curriculums much more than it did when I first started teaching nursing, because myself and my other colleagues of colour, for want of a better term, would teach that, because we're like, when you're looking at certain things, we're going to see it from a Black perspective. So we would just automatically teach that to a class, particularly if you're in a class full of people who look like you'll have to go down that road where you couldn't talk about some aspects of healthcare and assessment that's specific to Black and brown skin. But maybe my colleagues weren't. So, we have got that's why things like having a diverse teaching staff is really important. And fighting for it to be in the curriculum. And I'm teaching on this curriculum, and there's a lot of these ideas that are that are in the curriculum, and students are expecting it as well. Another positive thing about, let's say, things like Black Lives Matter, it created that sort of space, not just about the awful reason why it started off or regained momentum again with another Black man being killed by the police in the United States. But it's brought about these conversations where these sort of things are being spoken about, and are being spoken about in places of power in large institutions, from hospitals to education. It's just about keeping that momentum up. It isn't just something that, it isn't something that can be solved, right? Let's put some money and time in it over a year or 6 months, and that'll sort it out, and we can move on to the next thing. This issue isn't something you can move on to the next thing. It's something that we have to be working at constantly, definitely in my lifetime. I'm not as young as I used to be. So that's still quite a while to go. Things have definitely improved if you're Black or brown in the United Kingdom compared to 50, 60 years ago. Of course, there's been improvement, but there has been areas that have stayed pretty much the same, or the way that racism works is very, very different. It's arguably more sophisticated in many ways, actually, than it was 50 years ago in regards to working. And that's the issue of structural racism. And the terminology that we use, things like implicit bias, it's actually quite a nice, non-threatening term, actually, implicit bias. It doesn't sound like, if you say racism, people are like, but you say, I think there's some implicit bias that we need to discuss about. Even the terminology and the language has changed. And whiteness as actually a category, and whiteness as an area of study is something that 50 years ago wasn't really thought about, because it was so universally neutral that it didn't need to be discussed in any way. It's not a category that needs to be discussed, because it is the category. Everything else is different to that category. And we're happy to talk about things that are different, but whiteness isn't different, it is. So you don't necessarily have to talk about that. And so even how we talk about racism and race and ethnicity now has become more sophisticated, has become more complex, but it isn't as simple as, I don't like you because of the color of your skin, even though in many contexts that's what it's about. But the issue is why is that, and where has that come from? and those sort of debates that are really important.
Yeah. And talking about sort of the perennial issues that pop back up, there's a question here about Black History Month as well. I think we're looking at the time. We're actually overrunning, but I was so interested. I didn't want to say anything. So let's look at Black History Month. So the question is, does it help with cultural awareness in general in the NHS and nursing, and does it benefit patients having a Black History Month?
Black History Month. I'd like to think in the long run and in way into the future at some point, something like Black History Month is not necessarily going to be needed. But I still think at the moment that it still has a place. It still has a place to identify for other people who, so I have a lot of people that say to me, I think that, Black History Month is every day for me, and me too. But it's not mainstream. I mean, a lot of the debate is about the difference and the otherness of Blackness and not being the center and the universal norm Blackness being. So that's why anything that isn't the norm, LGBTQ month, Women's Day, that sort of thing, anything that isn't white and male is something different and needs to be highlighted. So I think at this time that I personally, my personal view, that it definitely has a place. It introduces new areas and new things to think about for people of all ethnicities that they possibly didn't know about, and to go looking at it in more detail and moving forward and informing them about their history and what their history is about. And that will move on and move forward beyond Black History Month. And the same for anybody else who's interested. If they go to any Black History Month events, there's some learning that takes place within this month. That what we want is that it moves forward and it moves outside of the month of October. That it impacts on what you do and how you think and what you know every day moving forward. So I think it has a place. I think in regards to for nursing and patient care, we talk about the social and the economic and the environment and the social political aspects of our patients and the history of our patients. So why do people of Caribbean origin eat and African origin eat the type of foods that they eat? So the reason why things like cow foot and pig's trotters, personally pig trotters my personal favorite. Oxtail is another one of my personal favorites. Well, why do Black and African people tend to cook that meat? Well, who had the rest of that cow or that pig? Historically, it wasn't Black people. So the steak, the filet mignon, the chops, the prime rib, or the pork chop, pork chops with that nice and lean. Historically, 100, 200 years ago, that is not what Black and brown people are eating, because that's what white people are eating. So anything that was left is what the Black and the brown people cooked. So oxtail, pig's feet, tongue, and also in regards to the working class white people, that's where offal tripe, that's stuff, the intestines and stuff. That's why they cook. That's why they have that. Jelly beans are quite easy to get. You can go and forage them yourself and cook. That's why certain certain class in regards to the kind of food that they eat. Filet mignon, I don't think I was about 25 when I figured out when I knew what that was. I'm eating oxtail. What do I know about filet mignon? So, knowing that history, then when you're looking after that patient, well, why do they want that type of food? What do you mean that type of food? Why do you need to add it to the hospital menu? Because, culturally and ethnicity wise, that's the kind of food that they eat. And then that's possibly why, it's high saturated fat. And then all the things on why are Black people more likely to have hypertension and more likely to have diabetes and stuff, because of the history that we have in the food. That we eat and have eaten over hundreds and hundreds of years. It's important to know, to have an idea about these everyday things that you don't understand why things are called what they're called.
But I'm always amazed, why wouldn't you want to know? Why wouldn't you have curiosity about things that you don't know about? Why would you only want to know about people who look like you? That's really dull, frankly.
Yeah. And
it's limiting.
You know, that's not our, like I said, if you're in the southeast of England, that's not our patient population.
No. Let's just whip round. Dave, was there anything that you wanted to leave us with? Because we've really overshot. We haven't finished half the things we wanted to talk about. We'll have to come back another day.
I suppose I'm just going to do what I normally do at this point and jump in and say about next week's guest. And I think it fits in really nicely with what Beverley's been talking about Black History Month. Because not only has this person got a huge catalogue of achievements and successes, one of them is that she was instrumental in getting Mary Seacole statue in London. And next week we've got Dame Elizabeth Anyonwu, who's going to be talking about her life. So, you know, absolutely looking forward to that because I've heard her speak a few times, and it's always a really good evening. So hopefully everyone that's listening tonight will join us next week. But I think, to be fair to Beverley, what a great job you know, you've done, and certainly, you know, the way you discussed intersectionality earlier, you know, I've heard it talked about sort of regularly, but I think some of the ways that you termed it, it was just really, really clear and easy to understand. So I'm sure people who've watched tonight have really benefited from that conversation. And hopefully I haven't said too much because, you know, sometimes it's that danger about wanting to jump in and make comments, but actually a lot of MHTV is sitting back and listening to the expertise and wisdom of our guests. And certainly you've come across as being, you know, a great guest tonight, Beverley. So thank you.
No, thank you again. Thank you very much for the invite.
Yeah. And just a quick word for the people listening to today. So thank you, Nicky, saying that not me, a different Nicky, saying she loved MHTV. We'll catch it later. Do. And just looking at the comments and things like that, one of the things I just love about kind of nursing is the fact that we haven't all agreed. We have different perspectives, but everybody has participated with a real sense of wanting to understand and be compassionate and kind and respectful and interested in each other. So thank you very much for that. Yeah. This is the only way we're ever going to move forward. So well done, everybody. Lovely to see you. And thank you for people who were very kindly tweeting and supporting us at the RCN Awards last night. Obviously, we had someone else. Well, we were okay with it. We had an absolutely fantastic night, and it was a lot to do with the kindness that we received from you guys, and it's so appreciated. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you next week. Night.
Bye for now.
Take care. Bye-bye.